So, after playing through Detroit Become Human a couple of times, I wanted to create a video that goes into a little more depth than I have on my live streams, to take a look at why this game has totally captured my attention and why I love it so much. Hopefully you'll have your own opinions about the game, and if so, I'd love to hear your thoughts. To begin with, for those that don't know, what is Detroit Become Human? It's an adventure game developed by Quantic Dream for the PlayStation 4. The game is directed by David Cage, who is known for other games like 2010's Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls. Detroit Become Human was first released in May 2018. The game has an immersive and cinematic feel, and you play as 3 android characters who the plot revolves around. The first is Connor, a detective whose job it is to hunt down sentient androids. You also play as Kara, who starts the game as a housemaid and nanny to a young girl called Alice. The third android character is Marcus, who, at the start of the game, is a carer for an elderly artist named Carl. The game progresses as you follow all 3 of these android characters, as their lives develop and change thanks to something known as deviancy. For an unknown reason, androids are breaking free from their original programming and taking on human traits. The whole structure of the game is based around you, as the player, making decisions on behalf of all 3 characters. The decisions that you make shape both the characters and the story. And for me, that's what makes the game so compelling. All through Marcus's story, the androids of Detroit are on a quest for equality with humans, and the fact that you are a human, well, at least hopefully, when playing the game, inevitably has an impact on the choice that you make. It's up to you whether to choose to try and achieve the game's ultimate outcome peacefully, or through force and fear. The changes in the characters are the game's basic concept, and you are always at the centre of how the story plays out. These types of choices are there right from the start. In the game's demo, and the first chapter, The Hostage, just after you meet Connor, the very first decision you are given concerns a fish by the broken aquarium. This may seem like a basic task to introduce you to the game's controls, but to me it now feels so much more than that. It's the first decision, perhaps subconsciously, on how you're going to go along with Connor's character and perhaps the game as a whole. If you leave the fish, you are fitting with his programming and protocol. The fish is irrelevant as it doesn't relate to the hostage situation. But if you choose to save the fish, then you are already showing traits of sympathy and humanity. And the curious look that Connor gives once the fish is safe says a lot. Perhaps the most noticeable thing about Detroit Become Human is just the way it looks. Detroit is set 20 years in the future, but there's a good balance in the scenery that we are familiar with an added smidge of futurism that makes the game more comfortable to play than, say, games which have flying cars and teleportation as icons of the future. The game deals with the issues of androids and their quest for independence, and Detroit cleverly plays this with constant reminders of our own history. It's not difficult to equate the android's quest with that of the struggle of minorities in the past. Clear comparisons are made with events like Marcus having to enter a compartment at the back of the bus, a rather obvious reference to the campaign of Rosa Parks in the 1950s. Connor and the other androids wear an LED device on the side of their heads to denote their emotions, but they also wear armbands to make it clear to humans who they are. This is something that it has its own comparisons with the Nazis and the Jewish community being forced to identify themselves. There's also references to the history of robots taking the place of car manufacturers in Detroit itself, as well as more general economic problems like homelessness and unemployment. The character design also gives us a familiarity. Even though we're dealing with androids, as they become more deviant, their facial expressions and body gestures become more human-like. But from early on, the game designers have added little movements that make the characters seem more real. The smallest of gestures or facial reactions from the characters tug at us emotionally and make them seem more human to us as the player. It's intended to give us an empathy towards them, which drags us into the story further. There are also the elements of family and friendship between the android characters that give them that little bit extra. Even smaller characters in the story make their own impact. Personally, I love the Jerrys. Their hive mind mentality and manufactured purpose of giving joy to children just melts my heart. And you can see them repeatedly throughout the game, giving them the extra awe factor. Ralph, who Kara and Alice find at the abandoned house, is such a complex character too. Damaged by his original owners, his mind troubled by the RA9 phenomenon, and yet wanting to be a family with Cara and Alice. As he appears so briefly in the game, Ralph could so easily have been just a menacing character, but the writers and creators made him complex and with a heart. Something that makes the game a little bit extra for me are the progress flowcharts at the end of each chapter. They show you the choices you have made and how those choices all tie together. But they also show you what you haven't done, making it inevitable that you're going to have to play the game through again and again to explore all the different outcomes. As you unlock parts of the plot as you play along, events are unlocked in the flowchart. So the way to completing all the flowcharts isn't that simple. An event you unlock in one chapter can come into play later on in the game, so there's an amount of strategy involved if you want to complete all the flowcharts. Let's take a look at just one example of the complexities of the charts and how your decisions have an effect on those charts and the long-term gameplay. In the first chapter, during the hostage situation, Connor may, or may not, spot an injured police officer on the roof terrace. If he does see him, you then have several chances to choose whether to help the cop out or not. If you do help the police officer by applying a tourniquet, this has an impact on the game later on. In the chapter Public Enemy, Connor is investigating the attack on Stratford Tower. Whilst in the broadcast studio, he is approached by the police officer, who thanks him for saving his life in the first chapter. If you didn't save the police officer, he never appears in this chapter. There's even more complexity to this one situation, however. If, like me, Connor was killed during the hostage, sorry Connor, he doesn't remember the situation at all. This one small element of the gameplay has a long-term ripple effect through the game. The tiny, intricate details are what make this game so complex. There's so much more I'd like to talk about with Detroit Become Human, but let's leave this review with a look at the sound. As well as being visually beautiful, the game has fantastic audio soundtrack and incredible use of sound effects. The particular standout elements of the game for me sound-wise involve Marcus. First, when he has to crawl his way out of the dump filled with abandoned androids. When restoring his hearing component, we get this. And later, when the androids of Jericho are taking over the TV studios, more subtly, we get this effect.
Here it comes.
Thirdly, when we reach the end of the game, Marcus's character gives this incredible and perhaps most powerful moment. Note how all the other sounds drown away to make this moment so effective emotionally.
Hold on just a little while longer. Hold on just a little while longer. Hold on just a little while longer. Everything will be all right. Everything will be all right.
So there you have it. My thoughts on what I think is the best game of 2018 so far. A detailed, thoughtful and complex game that opens the door to repeated plays with countless outcomes. I thoroughly enjoyed the game from the second I grabbed the controller and started the game to the last emotional scenes, however you choose to play Detroit. It keeps you focused on the gameplay throughout, it looks great, it sounds great, it makes you care about the characters and all their outcomes. I have huge respect to the game's creators and actors who brought Detroit Become Human to life, tugged at my heartstrings and thoroughly entertained me with such an incredible game. Detroit Become Human, I salute you. Here's hoping for a sequel, or at least some DLC, to find out what future escapades Hank and Connor get up to.